Okay, so dissociation of oxygen from haemoglobin. Slightly strange on this. It's often represented through a graph, which I'll talk about in a moment, and we look at something called the S-shaped curve, and we look at something called the bore shift. But let's strip things back first and sort of explain what dissociation is and exactly what haemoglobin does. So haemoglobin is a sticky protein. It's found inside your red blood cells. So if we draw a little red blood cell on there, within that red blood cell there'll be haemoglobin, and attached to the haemoglobin can be a maximum of 4 molecules of oxygen. So if I put in my 4 little O2s in there, in that situation there where the haemoglobin is carrying 4 oxygen molecules, we'd say that it is 100% saturated with oxygen. So that particular red blood cell, the haemoglobin within it is 100% saturated. Obviously within your blood, you've got a lot more than just one red blood cell. You've got thousands, you've got millions of red blood cells. And depending on where you are in the body, or at which point the blood is as it travels through the body, that will determine the percentage saturation of your haemoglobin with oxygen. Let's give a really simple example then. So we get rid of that. If we've got your alveoli, so the blood that's travelling around your alveoli in the capillaries, we would say is 100% saturated with oxygen. So the haemoglobin that's travelling through and past the alveoli, because the alveoli has got a very high partial pressure of oxygen within it. Remember this when we looked at diffusion last time. Because the alveoli has got a very high partial pressure of oxygen, that oxygen wants to make its way into the deoxygenated blood. The deoxygenated blood is full of red blood cells that have got haemoglobin within them, and all these little red blood cells travelling through and past the alveoli will be 100% saturated with oxygen. So they'll all have 4 oxygen molecules attached to them. So in that situation, we'd say the haemoglobin is 100% saturated with oxygen. If we then look at something slightly different, so if we look at what's happening within the tissues, so within the muscle tissues, and we'll draw a dodgy muscle like we did last time. So there's my muscle. That's got a low partial pressure of oxygen within it, so there's not very much oxygen within that muscle, and any blood that's coming past or through that muscle, so there's my capillary, the red blood cells within that capillary there, because we've got a low partial pressure of oxygen within the muscle, some of the oxygen is going to be given up by these red blood cells, and in fact it's about 25%, something like that. So about a quarter of the oxygen that was being carried in the haemoglobin will make its way into the muscle. So that would still mean each one of these red blood cells is still going to be 75% saturated with oxygen. So they're still going to have 3 out of the 4 oxygen molecules attached to them. Because they are 75% saturated, that means that 25% has made its way into the tissues through diffusion. So a little bit of oxygen makes its way into the muscle during rest, but actually your deoxygenated blood that's just leaving that muscle has still got 75% of the oxygen in it that it was carrying in the first place. Only 25% of the oxygen's gone into the muscle tissue. 75% is still saturated with your haemoglobin.